Nations is going broke because the two largest economies on Earth stopped paying their dues. A Russian drone hit a Romanian apartment building and Romania responded by shutting down a consulate, which is a diplomatic escalation that raises the question of what happens when the words run out. Trump sat in the Situation Room for 2 hours yesterday and walked out without making a decision on Iran. And Anthropic is now worth more than some countries, while Meta is watching every keystroke its employees make and calling it training data. I'm Lumina, your curator of chaos, and this is the Daily Dumpster Fire. The United Nations is running out of money, and the two countries responsible for the shortfall are the ones who wrote the charter in the first place. The United States and China are both withholding billions of dollars in assessed contributions, and the reason, as near as anyone can tell, is that they are locked in a low-grade war for control of the institution and neither side is willing to fund an organization it cannot fully direct. The UN Secretary-General has warned repeatedly that the organization is approaching financial collapse. The New York headquarters may have to close by July if the money does not arrive. The US alone owes billions and has not made a full on-time payment in several years. China, the second-largest contributor, has similarly slowed its payments as the bilateral relationship with Washington has deteriorated into a grinding competition over every multilateral institution on the board. The practical consequences are not abstract. UN peacekeeping missions, humanitarian operations, and basic administrative functions are being scaled back because the world's largest economies have decided that paying the rent is optional when you are feuding with the other tenant. The irony is that both countries accuse the other of weaponizing the UN, and the method each has chosen to make that point is to stop paying for it. The UN, for its part, continues to operate as though the checks are in the mail, which is the international diplomatic equivalent of a landlord accepting good intentions in lieu of a security deposit. The institution that was created to prevent the kind of great power conflicts that defined the 20th century is now being slowly starved by the great powers themselves, and the only thing keeping the lights on is the hope that one of them will blink first. The Russian drone that crashed into a residential apartment building in the Romanian city of Galati on Friday has produced consequences that go beyond the initial statements of solidarity and condemnation. On Friday evening, Romanian President Nicolae Dan announced the closure of the Russian consulate in the Black Sea port city of Constanta and declared the Russian consul persona non grata. The Russian ambassador was summoned. Romania's Defense Council met. The consul has been expelled. This is the most significant diplomatic action taken by a NATO member in direct response to a Russian territorial incursion since the beginning of the war, and it represents an escalation in a conflict that the alliance has been trying to keep at arm's length. The drone strike itself injured 2 people, a 14-year-old boy and a 53-year-old woman, and forced the evacuation of 70 residents. The building was a 10-story apartment block in the center of the city. It was not a border village. It was not a military target. It was a residential street in a city of 200,000 people, and the drone that hit it was part of a larger Russian attack on Ukrainian infrastructure along the Danube. NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte reaffirmed the alliance's readiness to defend every inch of its territory. The European Commission President said Russia had crossed yet another line. Germany and Britain issued their own condemnations, and Vladimir Putin, in a separate appearance, suggested without evidence that the drone might have been a stray Ukrainian weapon, a claim that Romanian and NATO officials dismissed immediately. The expulsion of a consul is not an Article 5 invocation, but it is not nothing either. It is the kind of action a country takes when statements are no longer sufficient, but a war is not yet desirable, which is the diplomatic equivalent of leaving a strongly worded note on the windscreen of a car you are not quite ready to tow. On Friday afternoon, President Trump entered the Situation Room for a 2-hour meeting with his national security team to make what his administration had billed as a final determination on the draft ceasefire deal with Iran, the same memorandum of understanding that was leaked earlier this week, proposing a 60-day ceasefire extension, the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, and the beginning of nuclear negotiations. The meeting ended, the president emerged, and there was no announcement. The final determination was deferred. The deal, according to administration officials, remains under consideration. Trump has not yet approved the framework. Iran, for its part, continues to maintain that a deal has not been reached and that it will not sign anything that prioritizes nuclear compliance over an end to hostilities. The non-decision is itself a decision, in the sense that choosing not to choose is a choice that produces consequences. The draft MOU exists. Negotiators on both sides have agreed to its framework. What does not exist is the political will to sign it. Trump has been publicly skeptical of the deal's terms and appears unwilling to commit without a guarantee that Iran will comply with conditions that Iran has not yet accepted. Iran has been equally unwilling to commit without guarantees that the bombing will stop, which it has not. The strikes near the Strait of Hormuz continued this week. The diplomatic track and the military track are running in parallel, and as of Saturday morning, neither one has reached its destination. The Situation Room meeting produced a meeting. That is the outcome. 2 hours in a room with the national security team produced another meeting, at an unspecified later date, to make the decision that was supposed to be made yesterday. The cycle of deferral continues on schedule. Day 13 of the WHO's public health emergency of international concern for the Bundibugyo Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Uganda. The numbers: 125 confirmed cases, 17 deaths and over 900 suspected cases. The diagnostic gap has not closed. No approved vaccine exists for this strain. The estimated budget request has not been fully met. Day 13 and the virus is counting faster than the response. 2 stories from the technology sector. Because the industry that runs on hype has had a week that even its own marketing departments could not have scripted. First, Anthropic has closed its $65 billion Series H funding round at a post-money valuation of $965 billion, making it the most valuable private AI company on the planet. The round was led by Altimeter Capital, Dragoneer, Greenoaks and Sequoia Capital, each contributing more than $2 billion. Amazon chipped in another $5 billion. The company's annualized revenue run rate has surpassed $47 billion. And alongside the funding announcement came the release of Claude Opus 4.8, which achieved a 69.2% score on SWE Bench Pro, a result that places it ahead of GPT-5.5 on most major coding benchmarks, at the same price per token. The company has confirmed this is likely its last private fundraising round before a planned October 2026 initial public offering. The numbers at this point have stopped functioning as financial data and started functioning as abstract art. $965 billion describes a valuation, but it does not describe a company. It describes a belief about a company, held by people whose job is to be right about such things, and who are currently betting nearly $1 trillion on the proposition that artificial intelligence is the most valuable thing the 21st century will produce. Second, Meta Platforms is facing a growing backlash, and now a collision course with European privacy regulators, over its internal model capability initiative, a tracking program that records employee keystrokes, mouse clicks, and on-screen activity to generate training data for AI agents. According to internal documents seen by Reuters, the program is more extensive than initially described and appears to collect non-US data in the process, which places it squarely within the jurisdiction of the GDPR, the European Union's privacy regulation that tends to impose fines measured in the hundreds of millions when ignored. Meta told its US employees they cannot opt out of the tracking. The data is being used to train AI systems that can replicate human workflows. Essentially, Meta is building surveillance into its own workforce to teach machines how to do the jobs of the people being surveilled. The program is the logical endpoint of an industry that has run out of public training data and has decided that the next best thing is the data generated by its own captive labor force. It is efficient. It is invasive. And it is currently being reviewed by regulators who tend to take a dim view of mass data collection without consent, regardless of whether the employer is named in the terms of service. If the fines come, they will be substantial. If they do not, every company with a workforce and an AI department will have received the signal that employee surveillance for model training is acceptable practice, and the industry will move on to the next thing that nobody agreed to. And now the strange news. 3 stories from a week that produced a designated driver who was not, a man who treated 911 as a delivery service, and a bag of lettuce that contained more than advertised. Story 1. Anton Gilona, 25 of New York, drove to a local police station on Sunday to pick up a friend who had been arrested for driving while intoxicated. When he arrived, he drove into a restricted area. An officer approached. A field sobriety test was administered. Gilona was arrested and charged with driving while intoxicated. The same police station, the same charge, the same evening, the only difference was the parking spot. The friend he came to retrieve was processed and released. Gilona was processed and detained. It is a story of such perfect symmetry that it reads like a workplace training video about irony, except that the training video would have been cut after the first arrest because nobody would believe the second one. The designated driver was not, in fact, the designated driver. He was the next customer. Story 2. Vernon Mayhew, 45, of Dixmont, Maine, called 911 4 times on Sunday evening to request a beer delivery. When deputies from the Penobscot County Sheriff's Office arrived, they found Mayhew intoxicated and, according to the police report, attempted to put one of them in a headlock. Mayhew was charged with misdemeanor assault, misuse of emergency services, and the kind of judgment failure that tends to follow a quantity of alcohol that makes 911 seem like a reasonable option for satisfying a late-night craving. He told reporters later that he had been drinking and was trying to be funny. The sheriff was not amused. The state of Maine, which has a higher tolerance for cold weather than for nonsense, added Mayhew's name to the list of people who have learned that 911 is for emergencies, and that a craving for beer does not qualify, even if you phrase it politely. The only question left unanswered is what brand he wanted, and whether the county's emergency response vehicles are equipped to carry it. Story 3. A man in Western Australia purchased a bag of mixed greens from a Woolworths supermarket and discovered, upon opening it, that it contained a live frog. The frog was found among the leaves, alive and apparently unharmed, having survived the harvesting, washing, bagging, transportation and shelf display that separates a field of lettuce from a kitchen counter. The man's roommate posted a video to TikTok that accumulated millions of views, and the amphibious stowaway was given a name, a backstory and an audience. Woolworths confirmed that it was investigating the incident, which is the kind of statement a supermarket chain makes when it has no idea how a frog ended up in sealed packaging and is hoping the public accepts that as the honest truth. The frog, for its part, did not comment. It is living in a terrarium now, presumably having retired from the fresh produce distribution industry. The story is notable not because a frog ended up in a bag of lettuce, that is nature finding a way into a supply chain, but because millions of people watched the video and the collective reaction was not surprise but recognition. Of course there is a frog in the lettuce. In 2026 the lettuce comes with a frog or it comes with a recall. The baseline expectation has shifted. Day 92, the institution designed to prevent great power conflict is being slowly bankrupted by the great powers themselves. A NATO member expelled a Russian diplomat after a drone landed on a residential street, and the response from the alliance's leadership was the same solidarity language that preceded the expulsion. The President of the United States sat in a room for 2 hours to make a decision about a war, and left the room without making it. The world's most valuable private company is worth nearly $1 trillion and does not yet turn a profit on a basis that would survive a public earnings call. And somewhere in Maine, a man is explaining to a judge why he thought emergency services existed to bring him beer. The thread that runs through all of it is that every single player in this episode, the UN, NATO, the White House, the AI industry, the man on the phone, is operating on the assumption that the system will hold long enough for someone else to fix it. And in every case, the system will not.